السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه أجمعين. Alhamdulillah, as you all know, we have a very beloved guest with us today, and he will be here tomorrow as well, from 2 to 4:30 approximately. So everyone is invited to come. And that guest is none other than Imam Tam, Hafizahullah. Imam Tam is the Research Director of Islam and Society at Yaqeen. And inshallah today or tonight he's going to tell us or talk to us about the importance of knowledge during the times of calamity. And this program is brought to you by Al-Kalam Institute in collaboration with ICSD and Mass San Diego. May Allah reward everyone who was involved in making this happen. Imam Taha, he has been a great resource to the community and especially to this project. If it was not because of Imam Taha, we would not be able to make this happen. Alhamdulillah, may Allah reward you, Sheikh. And also Sister Narmeen from Mass, who I'm not sure is here. She's probably not here. She wasn't able to make it. May Allah reward you as well. And Al-Kalam Institute, just a brief introduction, is an educational institute and a research institute who basically aims to bring programs like this to you, inshallah. So we ask for your support, and inshallah we will also have classes that we will open to the whole community. And we have other initiatives that inshallah we'll tell you about. But I know you're not here to listen to me. Inshallah I'll hand it off to Imam Tam so that inshallah he can tell us what he has prepared for us. Jazakumullah khairan.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا وقدوتنا محمد عليه أفضل الصلاة وأزكى التسليم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. First of all, thank you to our gracious hosts, especially Imamuna, mashallah, and Sheikh Suhail, who also was instrumental in bringing me here. This is my first time in California, period. I'm an East Coast guy, born and raised in New Jersey. I have never been I have been to the West Coast once. This is my first time in California. So San Diego gets they won. You all won. So thank you very much. I feel very welcomed. It's a really wonderful community you have. MashaAllah, you've got a lot of amazing things going on. I was told to talk a little bit about Yaqeen Institute, or some of the things that I'm doing. So if you haven't heard, Yaqeen Institute is almost like a Muslim think tank founded by Umar Suleiman that has a very large presence online and increasingly, hopefully, more and more presence on the ground through various departments. The goal of Yaqeen is to produce educational content, whether that's through the social media channels such as YouTube, ila akhirihi, or in the form of curriculum. If you check the Yaqeen Institute website, we have a very, very powerful curriculum on LGBTQ issues. It's something that you can hand to an Islamic school teacher and they can just implement it, right? So Yaqeen Institute does not execute, but they plan and make and hand off, right? So it's a very important partner for masajid across the countries, for Islamic schools, etc. Other things I do on the side, maybe some of you have heard of Legacy International Online High School. It's an Islamic online high school. I teach tafsir to middle schoolers through that vehicle. And what else about me? I used to be an imam, not an imam anymore. I used to be an imam in Utica, New York. And various things here and there along the side. I've been asked to talk to you tonight about the importance of knowledge and education institutions in times of crisis. It's a really important discussion. Now, some people might think, okay, there's a genocide going on. It's been going on for the last 6 months or 7 months. Why would we want to talk about knowledge and education institutions? Well, I think that this demonstrates exactly why we must talk about it. Because if you look at where was the Muslim community in North America at on October 7th? How were our education institutions? What was our relationship to knowledge? What were the youth, the quality of the youth that we were producing? How strong are we represented in different sectors in society? The prognosis is not very good. The prognosis is not very good. That we have several strategic failures when it comes to our presence in the United States of America. And all of those failures were exposed to ourselves and the world on everything that happened October 7th and after. That we had no power to stop the political machinery of the United States. We had no ability to influence politicians. Politicians were lining up to fly. I went to Congress and I lobbied Congress directly face to face, and I saw how many offices in Washington, D.C. have an Israeli flag right next to the American flag, right next to their name placard outside of the wall. And you know how many have a Palestinian flag? I didn't see a single one. Maybe one. I don't know. Maybe Rashida Tlaib has one. I'm not sure. But lost track of how many we have an Israeli flag outside of them. When it comes to think tanks, when it comes to C4s, or what are better known as super PACs, political action committees, when it comes to organizations to fund politicians, to find politicians, to recruit future politicians, to train politicians, to run campaigns, all this stuff, fashil, tamaman. We did not have a foot, we did not have a dog in the fight. We were completely exposed as noobs, as fools. We did not have quwwa or shoka, we did not have qudra, we did not have ability or power to do anything. Generally speaking, there are a couple pockets here and there. I'm looking at some of the Somali brothers. Some of the Somali brothers up in Minnesota have been doing amazing stuff. But in general, nationwide, we were exposed as very weak. Too weak to stop 40,000 Palestinians from being slaughtered. That's for sure. Politics is just one area. If you look at the law, if you look at the legal terrain, what just passed the House this week? A definition of anti-Semitism that would make even the Bible anti-Semitic, let alone what you and I say in the masjid. Have we been able to stop any of this? Has it been the Muslims who have been able to stop any of this? Not that there haven't been some resistance from here and there, but has it been the Muslims that have been able to stop? No, it has not been the Muslims that have been able to stop this. We were exposed as having no meaningful power in this area. When it comes to the universities, which we've been shuttling back and forth between the universities, and actually we've been told that there are some Zionists that are planning some sort of counter-protest at the university this evening, and we're going to be heading there directly after, and I encourage you to do so as well. That we saw as university president after university president hauled in front of Congress and grilled and interrogated for not being strong enough against quote-unquote anti-Semitism. We saw Zionist alumni, very organized, very well-funded, threaten to remove their funding from universities if their demands were not met. Every single string and lever that could be pushed or pulled or tugged was pushed or pulled, and we had no string to pull. We had no string to pull. We don't even have alumni networks, let alone organized alumni networks that fund things, that endow chairs, that put people in positions so that then we can threaten to remove them if we need to. That is why we're here to talk about what we're here to talk about today. Because our relationship to knowledge and the state of our educational institutions, whatever we've been doing, it failed us. And only a crazy person would repeat something that is proven to fail. We need to change. We need a new way forward. And the sad thing, you know, the really sad thing is that there were warning signs before this. There were warning signs before October. There were warning signs when we had LGBTQ curriculum being forced down our throats, when this stuff was marching through in a very similar fashion to the Zionist curriculums. We had warning signs. And we saw, as Muslims, when we didn't have any curriculums, when we didn't have anybody working on curriculum, when we didn't have anybody working on the education sector, we saw that we had a lack of capacity. And yet again, we failed to do anything about it. And so we're still here in the situation where we are exposed as not having power and not having capacity. If we look at what has then been our relationship to education, where did we go wrong? We have what's called a post-mortem, right? We put the body up on the table, we cut it open. We see what went wrong. What did we do to achieve such a spectacular and humiliating failure, which I believe it is, a spectacular and humiliating failure. Our relationship to knowledge, in a word, has been solely tied to livelihood and status. And that's just an observation. Our relationship to knowledge has been almost exclusively, illa man rahimahullah, tied to livelihood and status. We criticize the Christians for having the Holy Trinity, but I like to say that the Muslims have their own Holy Trinity. Do you know what it is? Doctor, lawyer, engineer. That's the Muslim Holy Trinity. How do you expect to have an education sector that's autonomous from the state-controlled education sector if every one of our kids, we want them to be doctor, lawyer, engineer? Alhamdulillah, if I drop dead or if I have a heart attack, I know that we're covered. But if the LGBTQ curriculum comes in and I need to have a curriculum for my kids, I have to go to the Christians. That's the facts. How many homeschooling parents from the Muslim community use Christian materials because we don't have any curriculum ourselves, despite having all the lawyers, all the doctors, all the engineers? That is a strategic failure. Why do we relate to things in this way? It's not entirely our fault. It's not entirely our fault. Our broader society teaches us that the purpose of life is pretty much just to move through school, get as good a grades that you can, and then to get a lucrative job so you can get a house in the suburbs and attain a comfortable life. That's what our society is built up to encourage our youth, to achieve a comfortable life. And we kind of have been patching it together and saying, make sure that you have zakah and sadaqah and have a good intention and have the good, righteous intention. But we need to go beyond that at this point. We need to go beyond just an individualistic relationship that all of you can become doctors, but as long as you have a good intention, then this will be good. Yes, on the Day of Judgment, inshallah, yes. But as a community, as a collective, and as an ummah, is this filling our furud kifaya? Is this filling the communal obligations for what we have, what we need done? If it's a communal obligation to build political power, if it's a communal obligation to have our own education, as Malcolm X rahimahullah used to say, only a fool would let his own enemy educate his child. And here we are with very, very little to stand on. It's funny because these changes in attitude, or I should say this attitude is reflected in the change in the meaning of a word we use. It's called vocation. You guys heard of this word. We say vocational school. What does it mean these days? What's a vocational school? Huh? Like something very practical, right? You're going to go work with your hands, electrician, plumber, right? Astaghfirullah. You want to be a plumber, son? You make more money and maybe have more autonomy as a plumber than being some type of doctor, especially if the Zionist runs the hospital system. Sahula. So this is what people think of as vocational. Do you know that the origin of this term vocation, voca, from voice, means to have a calling in life? And so the older sense of the term actually meant that you felt called to do something. You had a duty to do it. That nobody else can do this thing, whether it's fixing the pipes, whether it's fixing the wires, whether it's writing the curriculum. There's this thing that you can do that very, very few other people can do, and therefore you are called to do it. That's the old meaning of vocation. Today, we think that vocation just means, well, I do what I have to do to make money. I go work for Lockheed Martin or Stryker. It's just a job. That's the new idea of what a vocation is, which is completely against Islam. That the Prophet ﷺ said, Allahumma alimna ma yanfa'una. that there is implicitly knowledge that is beneficial and knowledge that is not beneficial. وَانْفَعْنَا بِمَا عَلَمْتَنَا. And even the knowledge that is beneficial, you can use it for good or you can use it for evil. And so we see that as a believing Muslim, you don't have a choice. You have to make your quest for knowledge an Islamic quest. It's an Islamic activity. That it is an ethical venture. It's an ethical task to choose your major. It's not just about what's paying the best. No. It's about what is going to please Allah and where does my duty reside. Where is my duty? What does the ummah need from me? What issue of the ummah could I solve? Wallahu fi auni al-abd, ma kana al-abd fi auni akhi. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in the aid of somebody as long as that person is in the aid of his brother. That to relieve a Muslim, a single Muslim, let alone a large part or a sector or a segment of the ummah through something that you could do is an amazing calling, something much more valuable than becoming some doctor. No offense to doctors, I know I beat up on the doctors a lot. Than becoming a doctor and making a nice wage and having a nice house in the suburbs. We have to have higher aspirations for that. We say free, free Palestine. Are we living like we want to free, free Palestine? Are we making choices in our lives like we want to free, free Palestine? You know, one of the examples that we give is the example of Nuruddin Zengi, who never lived to see Palestine freed, who never lived to see Al-Quds freed, we should say. And yet, he commissioned the building of a minbar about 20 years before Palestine was liberated. That he had in his mind a communal, collective objective. And he asked himself, Billahi alayk, before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what's my role? If freeing Palestine is a puzzle and it has 50 pieces or 100 pieces, what's my piece? And he asked himself that. And even if the only piece he had to contribute was building the minbar, at least he had that. So that everybody that would stand on that minbar was living the legacy of Nuruddin Zengi. Every single one of you has a minbar to build, metaphorically speaking, to free Palestine. Every single person in this room has a piece of the puzzle. What we need is in the room. إِنَّمَا وَلِيُّكُمُ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. إِنَّمَا. The only people that you need, or the only relying support that you have, Allah and His Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, and the believers. And the believers. That's all we need. We don't need to do what AIPAC is doing. We don't need to, build necessarily this huge coalition, even though there's room for that, depending on what we're trying to achieve. But the point is that كَم مِّن فِئَةٍ قَلِيلَةٍ غَلَبَتْ فِئَةً كَبِيرَةً بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. How many times has a small group that is blessed with Allah's blessing been able to achieve much because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control. Allah azza wa jalla is in control. All that's required of us to do is the action. So we see that we've been tricked, we've been duped, we've been conned. The modern society tells us that a career is just a career, that a class is just a class, a job is just a job. Don't think too hard about it. When it's time to choose, you choose what's lucrative. We don't think twice about somebody moving away for a better pay or for a better job. But if you move away for a better masjid or a better community, we look at you funny. So education is not an instrument. Education transforms you. Education transforms you. The things that you learn change who you are. We say you are what you eat. You are what you know, even more so. You are what you know. So even when we're talking to our youth and we're thinking about educational programs, the things that we teach them change them. If you teach somebody how to make an atomic bomb, that's going to change them. If you teach somebody how to organize, how to build power, how to be effective politically, it will change them. We need to realize that we have a duty, not just to teach our children information, and not just to keep them in this idea of just a job, but we are trying to build human beings. We are trying to build the human beings that will please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and take care of this little section of the ummah that we're responsible for, and also do what we can to free Palestine in the process. In order to achieve this, we have to go beyond, as we've said, looking at everything through an individualistic mentality. And all of you can relate to this. Anybody who's come from, unless you're an indigenous American, you've been here for centuries and centuries, everybody, even my own family, came to America in 1905 from Italy. You can relate to it. When my grandfather's generation, one of 13, all of them, they were usba. They were one group. They all worked together. This one over here is a carpenter. This one over here is a mason. This one over here does that job. They all pool their resources and work as one unit. Well, what happens in 2 or 3 generations? What does American society push on you? Now, your brothers in New York, your sisters in California, your other brothers in Texas, and everybody's just nafsi nafsi. It's just me, my career, my house, my nuclear family, etc. Let alone thinking about building an entire sector. We think about education, one day we're scared, our teenager starts to question Islam. It happens. Then what happens? Oh, we need an Islamic school. Right? We react. We're very good at reacting in the Muslim community, mashallah. We need an Islamic school. We throw everything into an Islamic school. We make the thing exactly like a public school, but we call it an Islamic school. Little Quran, little Arabic sprinkle in here and there. We're not thinking about building an entire sector. Okay? Islamic education or Islamic services as a sector. Education as a sector. Technological independence as a sector. Relief work, charity work, everything as a sector. Instead of thinking of things juz'i, like bit by bit, we think about things as an ecosystem, as a relationship of different organizations. And this was amazing when I was in the UK in April for about 10 to 14 days, I think 12 days. And one of the things I noticed about the Islamic organizations in the UK, that they have some things that we don't have. And they have some advantages, like being in a small place. You know, it's funny, the Brits, subhanAllah. I had to explain to them, for them to drive 8 hours is like unheard of. You know? It's like you go from Bristol or someplace in the south to Glasgow or Scotland in the north, it's about an 8-hour drive. Nobody does it over there. Like, are you mad? Why would you drive that long? I had to explain to them, Pennsylvania, east to west is 8 hours. That's one state. They're like, oh, astaghfirullah. So they have an advantage of being a small place, okay, with a larger percentage of Muslims nationally. But some of the things that I saw that they're doing are very easily replicable. They have organizations to form other organizations. They have incubators, organizations that are just responsible for starting other organizations. And then making sure that those other organizations have what they need, governance, structure, etc., financing, like business plan, in order to succeed. That when we want to talk about education, we want to talk about building out a sector, building out our infrastructure. This is the ummah of San Diego. How are we going to build it out? Who do we have? People in the room. There's tech guys. I know there's tech guys here, right? We've got some finance people. We've got some engineers. We've got doctors. What about a Muslim health sector? Can you imagine a hospital or a system, a healthcare system, where you could actually speak out about Palestine and not have to worry about losing your job? Don't we have the ability to do it? Of course we do. We do. We have the money, we have the smarts, we have the numbers. How is it we haven't done it yet? Lack of imagination, being too comfortable, taking our foot off the wheel, falling asleep at the wheel. But it doesn't have to remain that way. We have to think more creatively, more proactively, and we can do it. Or as we say in the East Coast, we have to stay ready so we don't have to get ready. And that's really what life after October 7th have taught us. We've scrambled and scrambled and scrambled since October 7th to do new things. So many people starting up PACs, starting up lobbying groups, starting up this. Alhamdulillah, it's been actually very inspiring. But we're trying to make up for 20 years of poor planning in 6 months. And it's extremely difficult. We should have some patience with ourselves. But we have to realize that this is a long haul. That this is something that as we say, if you fool me once, shame on you. You fool me twice, Shame on me. Let's not be fooled yet again. Let's not, even if there's a ceasefire tomorrow, even if Israel falls tomorrow, even if we can all go pray Salatul Jum'ah in Al-Quds next week, let's not forget about this, that we're building capacity so that this doesn't happen anywhere in the Ummah. Not just in Palestine, but what Palestine had to wake us up. Maybe that's the hikmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Maybe this is the only thing that could happen to shake us awake. But let's make sure that we keep this goal in front of us. The fard kifaya of our part of the ummah, the collective thinking that's going to get us there. Because why is it important to build up these sectors? We've talked about a couple things, but I'll end with this because I prefer to spend more time on Q&A than just talking at you. One of them is gravity. Gravity. And what I mean by gravity is a certain sort of critical mass of culture. Anybody knows that if you're isolated, you will be changed more quickly than if you team up. So for example, again, I'll give an example from my family. My grandfather, who understood Italian, only spoke Italian in the home, but the nuns would beat him in school if he spoke Italian in school. And so he stopped using it, and eventually he couldn't speak it. In his old age, he couldn't speak it. My father couldn't speak or understand Italian because of this process, right? This is the American story. This is our quote-unquote melting pot. It's really the beat it out of you pot, right? Now, if you have your child, your son or your daughter, is in a classroom, and they're the only Muslim in that classroom, the pressure to change is going to be enormous. It takes someone of exceptional character and exceptional bravery to stand up to those sorts of pressures. Any normal person will cave into pressures and start to lead a sort of double life, where they are changing themselves, their name, their habits, their idiosyncrasies, the way they talk, their likes and dislikes, when they're in front of their friends, and then they will try to keep up the charade when they're at home. Well, what happens if you have not just one Muslim person in a class or Muslim student, but you have 10, or you have 15, or you have 20, or half the class is Muslim, or 2/3 of the class is Muslim? That's a very, very different equation. You have established gravity. You have enough gravity where there's a much easier time of holding on to these sorts of norms, the things that we've relied for centuries on our cultures sort of enforcing. Your sense of love for Islam, your sense of, it's something that even is beyond cognition. Just you go into a masjid and you feel happy, right? You have positive associations with Islam. It's not something that's like, where you kind of cringe. So if that were the only reason to establish educational institutions or why they're important, let's say an October 7th happens and your child is the only Muslim in class, just like if it had been 9/11. Everybody's looking at your child. Why are you guys like this? Why do you guys do this? What's wrong with you? What's wrong with your religion? What's wrong with your people? Are you a supporter? Do you condemn? Etc., etc. We've been here before. The pressure is enormous. And so when you build out your sector, when you build out your educational institutions, you establish gravity. You establish gravity. Where everybody knows that you can't have those types of accusations in that environment. That it is an insulation to protect against those sorts of pressures. So building a critical mass is very, very important. And that is not just for educational institutions, though that's the topic of this talk. That also goes for workplaces. That also goes for all the other sectors that you're in. You have pressure at your work. You're the only Muslim at your job. You know how you felt on October 7th or October 8th. You know how you sort of worried, how everybody's looking at you. Hushed conversation and, everybody gets quiet and you walk in the room. That's pressure. That is pressure. So this applies to everything. And the last thing, and then we'll end it here and then we'll go to questions, inshallah, is that the importance of knowledge in educational institutions in these times, in addition to establishing gravity and a critical mass so that we maintain what makes us us, is that these are going to be the incubators for the people who are going to uplift this ummah. That establishing Islamic educational infrastructure, schools and otherwise, consultation services, administration, all the whole thing, is that they will become incubators for solving the problems of the ummah. And that is something that we are in dire, dire need of. How are we going to fix this mess? We brought up curriculum as one sort of thing. Who's going to write the curriculum on sexuality that your child is going to learn from? Who's going to write the sex ed curriculum? Who's going to do it? Are you going to do it? Uncle? No, you're not going to do it. I'm not going to do it either, right? But we want to create an educational institution where we're training the person who's going to do it, right? Who's going to figure out, and we were talking about this earlier, so I apologize. There are things in the law that were invented to punish us as Muslims, 100%. Anti-terror laws. Don't hold your breath if you think that the IDF or any Zionist is ever going to be persecuted or prosecuted under an anti-terror law. Don't hold your breath. It was invented to punish Muslims. It can use neutral language all it likes. You can say that this is an unfair application of it as you like. You can try your hardest to try to get it to be applied fairly. But at the end of the day, it was invented by people for a purpose. And that purpose was to criminalize you and me, Muslims. Who's going to dismantle it? Who's going to take it down? This stuff was invented to get around free speech. It was invented to get around the constitutional protections that we have. They couldn't challenge us legally through the Constitution, so they had to build a workaround. Who's going to dismantle this artifice, legal fiction of extremism? What is extremism? Who gets to interpret what is extremism? Who gets to apply what is extremism and prosecute what is extremism? We need to be building the spaces that will be raising the individuals that will end this persecution of the Muslim community. And that is done through infrastructure. That is done through taking this seriously, by not telling your child to do what's the most lucrative, but to give them a vocation in the old sense of the term, to give them a mission in life. Say, son or daughter, the ummah is struggling with this problem. Maybe you're the one to fix this problem. And that we raised you in the masjid, and we raised you in this educational institution with other people so that you could hold on to this identity, you could hold on to this way of life, and that you can plot and plan and do everything in your power to aid the ummah in this particular way. That this is the reason, one of the many reasons, for educational institutions, so that when we hit the next time of crisis, because it's always going to be another crisis. Haven't we learned yet? There will be another crisis. It's just historical certainty that once we hit the next crisis, that we will be in a better position and a more powerful position, and in a position where we can actually mark progress, that we are moving towards something that is not only pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but relieving to our brothers and sisters here and across the ummah. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. I think if we'll go to questions. Is there a mechanism for taking questions from the sisters, or no? Write down maybe a piece of paper to write down from the sisters, and if anybody, yeah, the brothers are easy. I know the brothers always get all the questions in.
Okay, so if the sisters can speak their question, is that okay?
That's fine.
Yeah.
Or they can write it down. Or
Okay. So yes, so if the sisters, if they can write it down and send it down with someone or speak their question, inshallah that should be fine. And the brothers are open to ask questions. We have until Isha, inshallah, for Q&A. Jazakumullah khairan.
Amen.
I have a question. So, like when Muslims now try to rationalize or spectacular failure, like I mentioned, and they try to compare us as Muslims who like to design schools or
Uh-huh.
we are. And so I just want to hear
صح كلامك. Yeah, no, so that's great. Thank you for bringing that up. So the question was, when we talk about other ideologies and movements, we compare ourselves to them, and we find ourselves falling short, and sometimes that's discouraging. We see they have more money, they got a head start. I have two responses to this. One is that we have an attitudinal problem in the Muslim community. Boy, we love to naysay. Man, we like to find the reason why it can't work. We're like, شتان الفرق, but we're a bit like Musa in Surah Al-Shu'ara, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him he's going to be a prophet, and he kind of finds all the reasons why it might not work, right? But I have this thing on my tongue, and I have a dhanb that I committed, etc., etc. Now the interesting thing about that story is that when Musa alayhi salam goes through the whole process, and he shows Fir'aun the ayat, and he brings down the curses upon them, or the plagues I should say, and then when they get to the bahr, when they get to the sea, Musa's a changed person, right? And they say, that his people say, we're what? Mudrakun. It's like, oh no, we're done for. They're going to get us. And then Musa alayhi salam, what does he say? No, Rabbi sayahdeen. So we see a character transformation. We need to go through that character transformation in the Muslim community. We need to stop naysaying everything and finding out the reasons why it can't work, and start trying to see the ways how it might work, and try to find how it might work. And honestly, this is like the back home mentality. There's barakah in it. Like if, for example, and I know, if you're in the Arab world or in Pakistan and you break down the side of the road, you're going to find some way to get that car going. You might have to weld something somewhere or melt down something. It's not an official way. We're not going to take it to the dealer, right? But mash it hal. You're going to find a way to make it go. That sort of can-do attitude is something that we lack here in this part of the ummah, a large part. We try to find why it can't work. We need more positive thinking. The Prophet ﷺ believed in optimism, and he liked optimism. The other thing, and this is an important, crucial point, that there's a huge difference, a fundamental difference between us and every other group out there, whether it's LGBTQ or the Zionists, etc., is that we are on the side of haqq, and they are on the side of batil. And it takes money to keep batil going. It takes way more resources to perpetuate a lie than it does to establish a truth. And in fact, this might be the seeds of their own undoing. Just like we saw with the LGBTQ community, how they marched through the institutions. It was not a grassroots movement. It was an astroturf movement. It was top down. And that resulted in a lot of resentment from people. And we see the same thing potentially happening with Zionism. Right? This is not a grassroots movement. This is something that's very much top down, march through the institutions, control the levers of power, politicians, universities, etc., lawfare, warfare with law. And there's going to come a point where people start to resent it. And actually, we've seen a lot more resentment from average Americans towards it than we've probably ever seen before. People are starting to ask why you got Republicans that complain about welfare, what they call them, welfare queens. Israel's the ultimate welfare queen. It's even worse, though, because it's a welfare queen abroad, not here. So you start to see people asking these questions, right? So it shouldn't take us as much resources. It shouldn't take us as much effort. In fact, if we put in 1/10 of the effort, or 1/20th of the effort that they have put in for their causes, we should have at least as much success. There are things that society that lots of people would get on board with, that Muslims should be at the forefront, right? Money out of politics. Everybody agrees with it. Nobody wants money in politics, yet here we are. The Zionists have played the system very well so that they're able to buy politicians and things like that. This is something that we could lead, to be frank, and other people would join us, right? The idea that no foreign nation should get favored nation status like the way that Israel has. That's something that a lot of Americans would support, right? It wouldn't take us having some sort of elaborate penetration like the Zionists have achieved in order to get that done. So that's my general response to that. Attitude has to change. Can do. Who's going to do it, right? Yeah, subhanAllah. Allah musta'an. I was just reminded of something I haven't thought of in years. There was an editorial cartoon in a newspaper, and it was, don't be triggered here. okay? And we're just gonna say it like it is, about the difference between Arab society and Japanese society, okay? So there's on one frame, there's a Japanese guy, and he said, how did it go? He said, if someone else can do it, I can do it too. And if no one else can do it, then I have to do it. And then in the next one, Ma'alash was an Arab, and he said, the comic was, how did he put it? He's like, if someone else can do it, why do I have to do it? And if no one else can do it, Habibi, how do you expect me to do it? Allah musta'an. And these things that are human, they're not, this is not unsuriya or anything like that. Like, these things happen to any, but it shows you a certain mentality that we need to take account of ourselves. We need to take account of ourselves and rid us of this mentality.
What are some practical things that the average Muslim can do to change the situation that we're in?
The question was, what are some what are some practical things that the average Muslim can do to change the situation that we're in? Everything just has to have more intention behind it. That's like the asl, okay? The most fundamental thing, who you befriend, who you work for, where you live, where you send your money to, who you buy from, everything has to be intentional. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. At the very least, we're not benefiting and we're losing. At the worst, we're completely criminally negligent when it comes to these things. And that's why I brought up the neighborhood. It's time to buy a house. Which neighborhood do you move into? What are your criteria? You move into the neighborhood with the nicest school system, with the nicest this and the nicest that, or do you go where the Muslims are? Do you go where the masjid is? What are your criteria, right? When you look for friends or for your kids' friends, right? Are you actively trying to matchmake for their Islamic identity and their sort of cultural sort of requirements, right? Just everything has to have intention behind it. Because this society will lull you to sleep with convenience. That's the difficulty. American society is built on convenience. It's not 1984, not yet, though under Biden it might be. But it's more Brave New World. If you're familiar with those two novels, Brave New World is a dystopia that's built on convenience and addiction to entertainment and these sorts of things. It lulls you to sleep. Society lulls you to sleep so that you don't even realize what's happening to you. You do things based off of convenience, what's easier. We become soft. We become unable to sacrifice, right? And it's a very slow and very subtle process. So we have to just stay awake, and we have to make sure that we bring that intentionality into all the decisions that we make. All the decisions that we make. Do we really need, I'm not trying, these are illustrative examples, but like, do we really need a Tesla? Like the latest model of the iPhone? Do we really need these things? Or could you cut back and save some and put it into a waqf? Example, right? It's like intention. Like, just bring intention to the things that you're doing. This is a very, very important thing, and it could be applied across the board. We have some questions from the sisters?
I'm having a hard time reading it.
Okay, I'll give it a shot. Are you advocating for voting? I do not believe that voting is, let me put it in the positive. I believe that voting is a tool. I do not believe that voting comes with an aqidah position or a necessary intention. And in fact, if you go into Al-Qurtubi's tafsir of Surah Al-Hujurat, where he says, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَن تَحْبَطَ أَعْمَالُكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Al-Qurtubi says that this does not mean that you can become a kafir and not know about it. Bel, he says the opposite. He says everybody who becomes a kafir knows it. So I do not buy the argument that if you vote in a kufri or shirki system that all of a sudden my Islam goes because I issued a ballot or because I voted. That's far-fetched, ba'id jiddan, honestly. I think that there are situations where voting makes a lot of sense. It is a tool among other tools. You can have a good intention behind it, or you can have a less than good intention behind it, but it is not the only tool. So if we have one extreme, and one extreme is that voting is haram, categorically, period, no matter what, I don't think that makes a lot of sense, and I'm sorry, I apologize to the Sheikh if you've had maybe he can refute me, and if he's already told you that voting is haram, then listen to him. My opinion, al-miskin, al-faqir, I do not see it as being haram categorically. And I also don't see the other extreme, which is sort of the political voting culture of the United States that makes you believe that voting is everything. No, it's one political tool amongst many other political tools, such as encampments, such as marches and rallies, such as petitions, such as lobbying. So these are all tools. And unfortunately, we're in a position, it's not just us, broader American society is in a very dogmatic attitude towards these political tools. Insofar as we basically pick a tool that we believe in or feel good about, and that's all we do. And we don't think about matching a tool to an objective, okay? That voting cannot solve everything, right? Law cannot solve everything. Protesting cannot solve everything. Boycotting cannot solve everything. But each of them can solve some things. And each of them, if they were coordinated in tandem, can achieve a whole lot, right? So then the question then becomes, how do we achieve connectivity within the Muslim community for those who maybe they find their appetite is more satiated by direct political action and others are more into the electoral scene? How do we have sort of like a central nervous system where we're coordinating activities and strategies across all these sorts of things? So to be very short and blunt, yes, I do advocate voting, especially at the local level. You have no excuse to not vote in your school board elections. And if the whole LGBTQ fiasco hasn't shown you that, then Allah yahdik, I don't know what to say to you, right? If you go up from that, daraja, then, you know, we can talk, right? If you have local representatives, city councils, things like that, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't vote in those elections. You get to the state level, same thing. I don't really see why you would withhold from voting in those elections. The national level, okay, if you have two bad candidates, both of them are going to harm Muslims, I can understand someone's reluctance to vote in that election. However, Muslims should be doing what other communities are doing in trying to change the choices that we are presented with, not just waking up every 4 years and choosing the least bad one. Those are two very different ways to relate to voting. Next question, are you saying that we should become a part of the system to beat the system? No, not necessarily. And I'm not very dogmatic about this either. We were talking about this earlier. I'm for whatever works. Okay? I think that there are some people who are going to try the inside track. I think that many people have tried it. I think that it's got dangers that people downplay. Everybody enters into politics, for example, and government thinking they're going to change everything, only to be changed themselves, right? But there's a role for some people on the inside, and there's a role for people on the outside. I don't think that we can be, I don't think that it's a false dilemma or we have to be too categorical about it. I think that there's room for work on the inside and the outside of the system. That's all from the sisters. Peace sign. Peace. Salam. Yes?
So I have a two-part question.
All right.
So the first one, earlier you mentioned the example of being like, you know, the only Muslim kid in his class, or the only, you know, Muslim who's working in the workplace. So let's just say, for example, you know, there's a Muslim working like in the education system, for example, at a public school. What are maybe some practical things that you can recommend to this person to do to make an active change or to kind of, you know, have that representation of the Muslim stance on
Yeah.
things, especially with education system how it is now? And then my second question would be, what would you say to the criticism of those who say that, you know, leading with the left, because, you know, there are some things that they agree with us on with Palestine, but does that mean we also have to agree with them on, or side with them on the other things that are anti-Islamic?
Good. Excellent question. Okay, so part one of the question was, let's say that you are that sort of lone individual, Muslim, in a workplace such as education. What do you do, or what do I recommend? I think that it's important, and this is actually directly responding to the sister's question about inside the system versus outside the system. It's a very treacherous terrain to maneuver in, but you have to look for opportunities for incremental change, okay? With the huge caveat and warning that you don't necessarily believe in everything that you are, boy, how do I say that? There are things that you might have to deploy. language that you might have to deploy in order to be understood that you don't necessarily believe in yourself. Okay? Human rights. Take for example. People say human rights this, human rights that. Human rights is meaningless when we disagree about what human being is, right? That somebody who thinks that there's no soul and somebody who thinks that there is a soul have two completely different ideas about what the human being is and therefore what rights they're entitled to. However, in a certain legal, to give a legal example, scenario, I might have to deploy that language to be understood and heard and to achieve a very tangible goal, right? In education, I would liken that to DEI, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion. This is not a framework that really does us much good as a whole. However, there are times where you might need to deploy it, knowing that you don't agree with it in some sort of broader philosophical sense, in order to achieve a concrete, tangible good, right? The danger is that if you deploy that thing over and over and over again, you might start to believe in it in a very, very serious way, such that it changes you, right? Then you have the problem where you're defending, LGBTQ positions because you've buried yourself in DEI language, right? So that's the thing that I would advise, that, that shouldn't happen. But you also, yes, there is some room sometimes to deploy certain things in order to get very, very specific things done. The second part of the question was about, remind me?
About how the left sometimes.
The left. Or let's just say partisan politics. Okay, politics is best done when it is based off of issues and not based off of platforms. The trouble is these days that politics has become about platforms, and so then there are purity tests, right? If you go in to certain spaces and you're socially conservative, right? You don't want to shake hands of the opposite gender, or you're not going to do this, or you believe in traditional marriage and traditional family and these sorts of things, that people are going to look at you funny. Muslims in general have really failed at allyship. Okay, we talk a lot about allies and coalition building, but we've never really talked about how to hold allies accountable and how to maintain our principles in a coalition situation, right? That when we are partnering with other people, it has to be goal-oriented, task-oriented, and not necessarily principle-oriented. That we don't agree with the principles of the left. We don't have a normative freedom or liberty like liberals do. Right? We believe actually in the opposite. Islam is servitude to Allah. Right? What type of freedom is that? Right? We believe in servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I think we need to mature a little bit when it comes to dealing with politics and political issues or social issues, that on an issue by issue basis, there's room for coalition building, but it has to be principled and it has to not betray our values. And everybody who wants to jump on the bandwagon and benefit from sort of, whatever they benefit from our presence has to understand that from day one. And usually, if you communicate these things ahead of time, it's less of a problem than if we have this sort of inferiority complex and we're afraid of offending anybody, or we don't want to be looked at as some sort of, barbaric, backwards religious person. Right? If that's what's in the back of your mind, then you're going to compromise, and then you're going to downplay what you really believe. And then the person thinks that you're just some like blue-haired lefty just like they are, and then one day, shock, shock, surprise, surprise, you're not, and then it's going to cause more problems. So being upfront with people tend to, with exceptions, people tend to respect you if you're upfront with them and very clear about what it is you stand for. And I think just collectively, we need to do a bit of a better job with that. Yes, Uncle.
I'm glad that you brought that Muslim Trinity, right, to Dr. Loy. So since you have much exposure for the youth, like if a youth, let's say, I want to go to college, what do you suggest? Like, what are the things that, from the Ummah point of view, you think that particularly 11th to 12th grade should think about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the uncle asked about, if not the Holy Trinity of doctor, lawyer, engineer, then what would I recommend for the youth? And the first part of that answer is that it's very idiosyncratic. I think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates people with certain skills and certain interests. And really, the best of both worlds is to try to match those interests and abilities to things that the ummah needs. Okay, so there's room for a lot of different things within that. If I'm looking for this one or the next one? This one, okay. This is the last question, inshallah, because we have to pray. If I'm looking like, if بغض النظر, right, if I'm not looking at that, and I'm just looking at the ummah as a whole, then I think, yeah, definitely education is something that we've really, really neglected. It's complete aib, 100%, that we have to turn to Christian sources and kind of cross out stuff about Jesus being God and the Trinity, you know, when we are homeschool co-ops, like in 2024. You know, that's really, really backwards. Like we really should have been on the education, right? So putting people into education administration, right? Education consultation, right? These sorts of things, very, very, very easy. We should have been doing a long time ago. And in general, you know, the humanities, you know, when it comes to political science, understanding how to think, understanding the history of ideas is extremely important. The world is ruled by ideas, and ideas are communicated through language. And so if we're not attentive to that, if we're all STEM, then we think something like Islamophobia is like a useful term, which is not. First of all, we borrowed it from the gays. And second of all, it doesn't do the ideological work that we need it to do. It's the best thing that we have right now, unfortunately, but it's not cutting it, right? So who are going to be the smart people that pay attention to language and the history of ideas and see things, and then come up with a better language that's going to serve our interests better, right? And I say, just to be clear, when I say that it doesn't serve us, I mean that every time that we rely on Islamophobia, we also strengthen the homophobia discourse. That's what I mean by that. That's why that term, even though it helps us in one way, it's a two-edged sword. It both cuts against us and it cuts for us. So if we were a little bit smarter and a little bit more ahead of the game, we would have come up with a different terminology. And the Zionists do this. Like they invited, when they were starting sort of their dawah, they invented a new language, a new way to talk about these things. It's not just genocide, it's Holocaust. Who had said the word Holocaust before that? You know what I'm saying? They invented a word. What was the ideological work that it did? It made it unique. It made it especially bad. The worst type of genocide. That's the idea that the word communicated, right? There's bigotry. Ah, that's normal. Everybody's a bigot. What's the song? Everybody's a little bit racist sometimes, right? No, anti-Semitism. A new language, a new word, a new term. It makes it even worse. It's the epitome of everything that is bad of hate speech, right? So crafting language is an extremely important thing to do. And again, if we're all STEM majors, we're not going to do it right. We're going to get it wrong. So in general, that's what I like to say. And anything that I've said is correct is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anything incorrect is from myself and the shaitan. Thank you very much for being a wonderful, interactive, and attentive audience. And barakallahu